Good morning, everyone. Today, we are diving into a topic that is as emotionally exhausting as it is misunderstood: how to handle narcissists. Now, I want to start with a little vulnerability because that's where all real connection begins. I used to believe that narcissists were just arrogant people who needed to be knocked down a peg. But as I went deeper into the research, I discovered something that surprised me: narcissism isn't rooted in self-love, it's rooted in shame. That's right. The narcissist's arrogance? That's not confidence. That's armor. It's what they wear to cover a deep, often unacknowledged belief that they are not enough. So the first step in handling narcissists is this. When we encounter someone who's always right, always superior, and deeply resistant to feedback, what we're really seeing is someone who's terrified of being seen. Terrified of being ordinary. This doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does explain it. And when we understand that, we stop making it personal. We stop dancing for their approval. We stop thinking we can fix them. And instead, we start doing the next, most loving thing. This is hard work. Especially if the narcissist is someone close to us: a parent, a partner, a colleague. But boundaries are not walls. They are the lines we draw to protect what is sacred inside of us. Let me be clear, boundaries are not mean. Boundaries are kindness in action. They say, I will not participate in this manipulation. They say, I care about myself too much to accept being. They say, you don't have to change, but I will no longer tolerate this dynamic. Boundaries are how we show up for ourselves without becoming bitter. Now, here's the nuance. Just because we recognize their pain doesn't mean we excuse the impact. We can have empathy, we can understand where someone's coming from without giving them the keys to our peace of mind. Empathy says, I see your pain. Enabling says, I'll carry your pain and excuse everything that hurts me. That's not healthy. That's codependency dressed in compassion's clothing. And this is perhaps the hardest truth of all. Some of us stay in toxic relationships with narcissists because we hope that if we just love them enough, they'll change. That they'll see us. Choose us. Value us. But you cannot love someone into healing. That's their journey. Our job is to know our worth, to honor it, and to let go of the belief that enduring mistreatment makes us stronger. Strength isn't how much we can tolerate, strength is how fiercely we can protect our inner peace. So, how do we handle narcissists? We handle them by refusing to become their emotional supply. We handle them with grounded empathy, with unshakable boundaries, and with a commitment to our own well-being. We handle them by choosing connection with ourselves over approval from them. And in doing so, we reclaim our power not with force, but with fierce self-respect. When we talk about narcissism, most people immediately picture someone loud, arrogant, maybe even cruel, someone who walks into a room and dominates the space like they own it. They correct everyone. They deflect responsibility. They seem completely full of themselves. But that picture, while partly accurate, is incomplete. Because narcissism isn't actually about being full of yourself. It's about being hollow and terrified someone else will notice. One of the most important things I've learned in over 2 decades of studying shame, vulnerability, and emotional resilience is this: narcissism isn't a character trait, it's a defense. And like all defenses, it's designed to protect something tender underneath. What's underneath narcissism is almost always a deep, unhealed shame. A shame that says, I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, I don't matter unless I'm extraordinary. And when you live with that kind of internal dialogue, you don't build connection, you build armor. Now, what do I mean by armor? I'm talking about emotional protection mechanisms. The things we wrap ourselves in to keep from being exposed, to keep from being vulnerable. For some people, that armor looks like perfectionism. For others, it's people-pleasing. And for narcissists, it's grandiosity, superiority, and control. That armor shows up as a need to be admired constantly, a refusal to take blame, a chronic hunger for validation, and a relentless deflection of criticism. It's tempting to look at someone acting this way and label them as toxic. But labels are shortcuts. And while they can be useful, they can also keep us from seeing the full picture. When we label someone as a narcissist, we can forget that we're looking at a person wearing a very heavy suit of armor, one they likely began building as a child. A child who may have been praised only for achievement, never for effort. A child who learned that love had to be earned, that failure was dangerous, and that being ordinary meant being invisible. Understanding this doesn't mean we excuse harmful behavior. But it does allow us to separate the person from their defense mechanisms. And that distinction is everything. Here's why this matters so much: when we don't recognize the armor, we make narcissism personal. We internalize it. We say, why are they treating me this way? What did I do wrong? We start to second-guess ourselves, to shrink, to twist ourselves into someone more acceptable just to avoid their criticism or withdrawal. But the truth is, narcissism isn't about you. It's about their fear of being insignificant. It's about their desperate need to be seen as special because deep down, they don't believe they matter unless they're better than everyone else. That realization can be liberating. Because when we recognize the armor, we also recognize that we're not responsible for carrying it. We don't have to fix it. We don't have to soften ourselves or lose our sense of truth just to keep the peace. What we can do is respond from a place of clarity. We can say to ourselves, I see what's happening here. This person is wearing armor so thick, they can't connect with me honestly. And while I have compassion for what that armor is protecting, I don't have to walk on eggshells because of it. There's another important reason we need to see the armor: it keeps us from falling into false hope. So many of us, especially those who are naturally empathetic, stay in relationships with narcissists thinking that if we're just kind enough, patient enough, loving enough, they'll finally feel safe enough to take off the armor. But we can't love someone into vulnerability. Vulnerability is an inside job. It requires a person to choose honesty over image, self-reflection over blame, and connection over control. And not everyone is ready to make that choice, especially if the armor has been serving them for a long time. Recognizing the armor also helps us maintain our own integrity. It's easy to get caught in power struggles with narcissists. You push, they push harder. You bring up something painful, they deflect or attack. It can make even the most grounded person feel like they're losing their grip on reality. But when you understand that this behavior isn't about domination, it's about defense, you stop playing the game. You stop trying to win. You stop trying to convince. And instead, you start making choices that protect your own mental and emotional well-being. Let me be clear, seeing the armor is not an invitation to overextend your compassion. It's not a call to stay in an abusive situation out of empathy. Compassion has boundaries. In fact, the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself and the person wearing the armor is to stop engaging with the fantasy that you can fix them. You can love someone and still walk away. You can see someone's pain and still say, this behavior is not okay with me. In the end, recognizing the armor means learning to look beneath the surface, not to excuse what we see, but to understand it. And in understanding it, we get the power to make decisions from a place of wisdom rather than reactivity. We get to hold our empathy and our boundaries at the same time. We get to stay in our truth, even when someone else can't face theirs. So the next time you find yourself face to face with a narcissist, pause for a moment. Don't just react to the arrogance or the deflection or the charm. Ask yourself, what armor am I seeing? What might this be protecting? And what do I need to do to honor myself in this moment? Because the goal isn't to tear down their armor. The goal is to stop confusing it for truth. Would you like this expanded section added into the full speech or saved as a separate resource or handout? When we talk about handling difficult relationships, especially with narcissistic people, the conversation always comes back to boundaries. And I know, for a lot of us, that word can feel intimidating. It can sound like confrontation, or rejection, or even punishment. But the truth is, boundaries are none of those things. Boundaries are not about shutting people out. They're about choosing what we let in. They are not a form of cruelty, they're actually one of the most powerful expressions of love and integrity we have. Boundaries are kindness in action. Let's start here. Boundaries are not just something we put between us and other people. They are something we stand in, something we hold, something we live. A boundary is a clear line that says, this is what I'm okay with. This is what I'm not okay with. It's not dramatic. It's not aggressive. It's not a threat. It's simply truth. And when we speak our truth with clarity and compassion, we are practicing one of the highest forms of emotional maturity. But here's where it gets tricky, especially with narcissists. Because narcissists often react to boundaries as if they're personal attacks. When you say no, they hear rejection. When you ask for space, they hear abandonment. When you stop allowing them to manipulate or guilt you, they accuse you of being selfish or cold. That reaction is part of the manipulation cycle. It's how they try to get you back in line. And if you're someone who's wired for empathy, someone who's been conditioned to make others comfortable at your own expense, that pushback can feel excruciating. But here's the thing, their reaction doesn't define your boundary. Their discomfort doesn't mean you've done something wrong. In fact, when people benefit from your lack of boundaries, your boundaries will always feel like betrayal to them. That doesn't make them wrong. That makes them necessary. We've been taught, especially those of us raised to be caretakers or peacemakers, that kindness means saying yes. That being a good person means being endlessly accommodating. But that's not kindness, that's self-abandonment. And we cannot connect with others in healthy ways when we are disconnected from ourselves. Real kindness is rooted in honesty. And honesty requires boundaries. When I say boundaries are kindness in action, I mean they are how we stay in relationships without losing ourselves. They are how we show up with open hearts but closed gates when necessary. They are how we say, I want to stay connected with you, but not at the cost of my own well-being. And that is a courageous, deeply loving stance to take. It's loving because it honors both people. It says, I care about you, and I also care about me. It doesn't villainize the other person, and it doesn't martyr the self. Boundaries are how we hold space for both compassion and accountability. And when we're dealing with someone who struggles with narcissism, someone who doesn't naturally see or respect limits, boundaries are how we communicate with clarity rather than chaos. Now, let's be real, setting boundaries with narcissists is rarely smooth or simple. It might mean repeating yourself many times. It might mean enduring manipulation, guilt-tripping, or gaslighting. It might mean grieving the version of the relationship you wanted to have, and accepting the version that actually exists. But what's on the other side of that grief is a deeper peace. A peace that comes from no longer pretending. No longer hustling for worthiness. No longer silencing yourself to keep the other person comfortable. One of the most radical truths I've learned is that we don't set boundaries to change other people. We set boundaries to stay true to ourselves. That shift in mindset changes everything. Because when we stop using boundaries as tools for control, and start using them as expressions of self-respect, we move out of power struggles and into emotional alignment. We stop asking, how can I make them stop treating me this way, and start asking, what will I no longer allow, even if they never change? That's empowerment. That's where healing begins. It's also where kindness begins. Not the kind of kindness that comes from fear or guilt or conditioning, but the kind that is rooted in integrity. Because when we respect ourselves enough to hold a boundary, we are also respecting the relationship enough to tell the truth. We're saying, this is the real me. This is what I need. And I'm trusting you enough to be honest about it. And if the other person can't or won't meet us there, then the boundary gives us clarity. It lets us decide what role, if any, that person will have in our lives. It doesn't have to be dramatic or angry. It can be quiet, steady, firm. Because boundaries don't require force. They require consistency. I often say that the most compassionate people I've ever known are also the most bound. That's not a coincidence. It's because they've learned that compassion without boundaries becomes self-sacrifice. It becomes enabling. It becomes resentment. But compassion with boundaries? That's the sweet spot. That's where real connection can grow. Because it's based on mutual respect, not performance or fear. So when we talk about handling narcissists, the conversation isn't about fighting them, fixing them, or outmaneuvering them. It's about knowing where we end and where they begin. It's about having the courage to say, I'm responsible for how I treat myself. And I'm no longer available for dynamics that require me to disappear. That is kindness. That is clarity. And that is how we reclaim our peace, our power, and our sense of self in relationships that might otherwise leave us feeling lost. Boundaries are not the end of love. They are the shape of love. The structure that holds it. And sometimes, the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and for others is to draw a line that says, this is what love looks like. Anything less is not welcome here. Let me know if you want this paired with a reflective worksheet or tailored for a specific audience like a therapy group, a corporate workshop, or personal coaching content. Empathy is one of the most powerful tools we have for connection. It allows us to step into another person's experience, to feel with them rather than feel for them. Empathy says, I get it. I've been there. You're not alone. It is, at its core, about presence. Not fixing, not solving, just witnessing and understanding someone's truth without judgment. But like all powerful tools, empathy has to be used with intention. Because when we extend empathy without boundaries, when we don't stay grounded in our own truth, empathy can slide into something else. It can become enabling. Now, this can feel like a blurry line, especially when we're dealing with narcissistic people. These are often folks who have built entire personalities around being special, being admired, being right. They resist accountability and often spin pain into blame. And if you're someone who's naturally empathetic, someone who's wired to care, to understand, to connect, it can be incredibly easy to get swept into their emotional orbit. We see the wounded child beneath the bravado. We see the fear beneath the rage. We see the hurt beneath the manipulation. And we tell ourselves, if I can just love them enough, if I can just stay patient, maybe they'll finally feel safe enough to change. But here's the hard truth, empathy without limits is not love. It's self-abandonment. And no one wins when we confuse understanding someone's pain with tolerating their harmful behavior. Let me be clear. Empathy is essential. But it must be paired with discernment. Discernment says, I see your pain, and I'm also paying attention to your actions. It says, I believe in your humanity, and I also believe in mine. When we extend empathy to someone who is emotionally manipulative or narcissistic, we have to stay rooted in our own self-awareness. We have to know what's ours and what isn't. Because narcissists are experts at projection. They will hand you their shame, their anger, their fear, and if we are not careful, we'll carry it for them, thinking that's compassion. But carrying someone's emotional load doesn't heal them. It just depletes us. Enabling happens when we allow someone to continue destructive patterns unchecked. It's when we excuse behavior because we understand where it comes from. But empathy is not about erasing accountability, it's about holding both truth and tenderness at the same time. We can say, I see why you're hurting, and still say, your behavior is not okay. We can acknowledge the trauma that shapes someone, and still choose not to participate in the drama that continues to unfold because of it. And that's where the emotional work gets real. Because when we empathize with narcissists, there's often this quiet hope in the background that if we just stay gentle, if we avoid triggering their defenses, if we keep the peace, they'll finally soften. But that's not empathy. That's fear masquerading as empathy. That's walking on eggshells, not walking in truth. The irony is, the more we enable narcissistic behavior in the name of empathy, the more disconnected we become from ourselves. We start to filter our words, our reactions, our needs. We twist ourselves into emotional pretzels trying to avoid confrontation or conflict. We call it compassion, but it's actually a form of self-erasure. And over time, that erasure turns into resentment. Not just toward the other person, but toward ourselves for allowing it to continue. There's a way to hold empathy that actually empowers both people. It starts with seeing clearly. We can look at a narcissistic person and say, I get that this behavior is coming from pain. And then we can ask, but what does it cost me to stay in this dynamic? That question is not selfish. It's responsible. It's what keeps empathy from becoming a cage. Because empathy that costs us our voice, our peace, our dignity, that's not empathy anymore. That's sacrifice. And no one should have to sacrifice their wholeness to keep another person emotionally comfortable. It's also important to remember that narcissism thrives in relationships where boundaries are soft and responsibility is lopsided. When we keep giving without receiving, when we keep forgiving without repair, when we keep empathizing without limits, we're not helping. We're enabling a cycle that keeps both people stuck. One person keeps avoiding growth, and the other keeps avoiding truth. So what does empathy with boundaries look like? It looks like saying, I care about you, and I will not allow you to speak to me that way. It looks like stepping back when someone refuses to take accountability, even when it hurts. It looks like being present to someone's pain without internalizing it as your own responsibility to heal. It looks like refusing to participate in the emotional chaos, while still holding compassion for the struggle underneath it. This is tough work. Especially when we've been conditioned to believe that love means loyalty at any cost. But love, real love, includes limits. And empathy, real empathy, includes self-respect. We are not here to be containers for other people's unprocessed pain. We are not here to absorb mistreatment in the name of understanding. We are here to love others without losing ourselves. So if you're in a relationship, whether it's a partner, a parent, a friend, where you're constantly giving empathy and getting blame in return, where your compassion is met with contempt, where your kindness is mistaken for permission, I want you to ask yourself, am I helping, or am I disappearing? Because if you are disappearing, it's time to come back home to yourself. It's time to remember that empathy isn't about rescuing, it's about witnessing. It's not about fixing, it's about feeling with. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can say is, I see your pain, and I'm stepping back, because I also need to protect my own. That is empathy in its most courageous form. That is empathy without enabling. And that is how we begin to reclaim both our compassion and our power. Let me know if you'd like the final section, You Can't Heal Someone Who Doesn't Want to Heal, expanded in the same way, or if you'd like these turned into a downloadable guide or resource. There's a moment in every hard relationship where we finally hit the wall. Maybe it's after the 100th apology that never leads to change. Maybe it's after another broken promise or another angry outburst followed by silence. Maybe it's after years of trying to keep the peace, trying to be enough, trying to hold it all together. And in that moment, there's this quiet, often painful truth that settles in: we can't heal someone who doesn't want to heal. And it's not because we didn't love hard enough, or try hard enough, or care deep enough. It's because healing is an inside job. We live in a culture that romanticizes the idea of saving someone. We've all seen the movies, heard the songs, maybe even lived the story, the one where if we just show someone enough love, enough grace, enough patience, they'll finally see the light. They'll soften. They'll change. They'll come home to themselves. And if you're someone who's deeply empathetic, someone who's attuned to pain and longing, someone who sees the good even in people who hurt you, you know how easy it is to fall into that role. The healer. The fixer. The emotional caretaker. But what we rarely talk about is the cost of living in that role. What it means to carry someone else's healing while abandoning your own. Especially when you're dealing with someone who exhibits narcissistic traits, someone who has learned to deflect blame, deny responsibility, and weaponize your empathy. It can feel like your love is constantly being poured into a bottomless well. You offer insight, they twist it. You offer support, they demand more. You try to connect, they build walls. And still, you stay. Because you believe in their potential. You believe in who they could be, if only they'd do the work. If only they'd look inward. If only they'd want to change. But here's the hard truth: wanting someone to heal is not the same as them wanting to heal. You can't do the inner work for someone else. You can't force introspection, accountability, or growth. You can't make someone face their shame if they're still using control, blame, or charm to cover it. And you definitely can't drag someone across the finish line of their healing if they're still sitting at the starting line pretending there's no race at all. Healing isn't about insight alone. It's about action. It's about doing the difficult, vulnerable, sometimes painful work of looking inward and asking, what needs to change? It takes humility. It takes courage. And it takes a willingness to get uncomfortable. And that's why some people, especially those who have built their identity around being right, admired, or untouchable, don't choose healing. Because healing requires facing the very wounds they've spent a lifetime avoiding. It requires laying down their armor. And for some, the fear of being exposed is greater than the pain of staying stuck. When we don't accept this, when we keep believing we can love someone into healing, we end up betraying ourselves. We stay in relationships that deplete us. We rationalize behavior that hurts us. We lose sleep, time, energy hoping for a breakthrough that may never come. And while we're focused on their journey, our own needs, dreams, and mental health quietly slip out of view. This isn't about giving up on people. It's about being honest with ourselves. It's about recognizing the difference between support and self-sacrifice, between love and enabling, between empathy and overfunctioning. You can still care deeply about someone and accept that they're not ready or willing to do the work. You can still hold compassion for their pain without agreeing to be collateral damage in their story. The most loving, honest thing we can do sometimes is to step back. Not out of bitterness or revenge, but out of clarity. Out of the realization that you can't carry someone's healing and your own at the same time. You can't teach someone who doesn't believe there's anything left to learn. You can't reach someone who's made denial their safest home. And it's not your job to try. Healing requires consent. And it's not just verbal. It's in the willingness to listen, to reflect, to take ownership. It's in the decision to show up differently not just once, but over and over again. And when someone isn't choosing that for themselves, all the love in the world won't be enough to create real change. Letting go of the fantasy that we can save someone is one of the hardest, most courageous acts of self-respect we can make. It often comes with grief, the grief of unmet hopes, the grief of a relationship that never became what it could have been, the grief of realizing that love alone is not always enough. But it also comes with freedom. With space. With the possibility of healing ourselves instead. Because while we cannot heal someone who doesn't want to heal, we can choose to heal ourselves. We can turn our attention inward. We can ask, why did I stay so long? Why was I afraid to leave? What do I need to rebuild in me? That's where our power lies. In our willingness to choose truth over illusion, peace over chaos, and healing over fantasy. You deserve relationships that are mutual, reciprocal, grounded in reality, and capable of growth. You deserve to be met, not managed. To be respected, not rescued. To be loved, not used. And that begins with remembering that your healing is not a reward for fixing someone else, it's your birthright. So, if you're standing in that quiet moment, looking at someone you love, and realizing they're not choosing healing, let that truth guide you. Not into shame or despair, but into a deeper kind of clarity. The kind that says, I release you to your journey, and I return to mine. That's not giving up. That's coming home. Let me know if you'd like all 4 expanded sections compiled into one full-length speech or workbook format for presentation, reflection, or teaching purposes. Alright friends, if this resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to me to have you here. Thanks for watching, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.